Welcome to the Creative Condition podcast, an ongoing series of conversations and considerations to help people understand and embrace their own unique creativity for fulfilling lives and brilliant careers. My name is Ben Talon. I'm an illustrator and author, and I bring 16 years of creative industry experience working with the New York Times, The Guardian, the Premier League, and more. And I invite designers, artists, psychologists, scientists, coaches, athletes, sensitivity experts, and all kinds of thought leaders to help us broaden our knowledge of creativity. Creativity is a fundamental pillar of human happiness, a vital ingredient in the solutions to our problems, but so often misunderstood. The show is supported by founding sponsor and B Corp, Illustration X. Take a look at their stunning range of illustrators and animators at illustrationx.com. If you like the music for the show, it's by Dirty Freud, who you can listen to now on Spotify and all good music streaming services.
Was born and raised in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, which was historically like a steel town, a lot of steel mills, and so had a little bit of a blue collar reputation in the United States, but actually has been through quite a renaissance in the last few decades. As those steel mills have closed, it has become much more a hub for biotech, tech. One of the leading technology universities in the country are there. So it's quite an interesting place in terms of those two forces. But I'm really the product of like an Irish father, an Italian mother, a lot of family, a lot of food, a lot of drink, a lot of togetherness, and really a lot of emotion, a lot of storytelling, a lot of expression, a lot of jokes, a lot of, like, I don't think I was conscious of it growing up, but as I reflect back on it, and even when I think about my aunts and uncles now who write poems for family events, who paint, who've taken up drawing in their retirement. Even my father, who was an athlete, known as a pretty tough guy in his, early part of his life. And then he was a painting contractor. And the back half of his life, was deeply creative. He was a painting contractor, but yet he cared about the logo and his signage, and he would dress these mannequins up and put them in the front lawns of the places that he was, like quite bizarre a little bit. But he was even, I think then in an area you wouldn't expect it, bringing a sense of storytelling and creativity. So it now doesn't really surprise me that I have gravitated towards that as my life's work.
Yeah. And, when you speak there of big families and sort of storytelling, this is a prevalent thing that I pick up on with many people, actually. And I know you worked under Sir John Hegarty for a time, and he, he really, the minute I mentioned background, he just came alive telling stories about these Irish aunts and the kind of, these rich characters who he had the joy of observing. Is that something that also kind of informed your character and your understanding of self?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, absolutely. And I think, I'm quite, I think, fortunate in that both, my parents met very young, and both of their family, all the extended family was in Pittsburgh, and the families were quite blended. We did everything kind of together. So we constantly had characters, as you say, around. And again, I didn't realize that not everyone's family stayed until 3 a.m. and ended, probably a little overserved, and, regaling with stories that got bigger and bigger with each telling. And, that just was par for the course. And, I think the other thing that helped me a lot was, a mother who was a real partner to my father. So they built a business together, and he was very clear that he couldn't do anything without her, that he trusted her counsel and her advice, and that she was an equal and very important partner in building that. I grew up with 2 sisters, so they were 3 girls, and way before being a, girl dad was a thing, my dad was very proudly the father of girls and made sure that we had a voice, and that as long as we were respectful, we could push back, we could debate, we could express ourselves. And really, my mother's father, who came out of a generation where this was really not popular, was the same. He was he was an educator and a principal, but had two girls and wanted them to get educations and have points of view. And so I think I really benefited not only from the creative sort of influence, but also a very intentional um, cultivation of a voice. Interestingly, I think creativity is one of the last realms where there is probably still a glass ceiling, so to speak. I think we've seen, certainly not the only, but one of the areas we've seen women, I think, rise up in lots of different areas. And within the creative industry, I think women have found positions of power. But I think when you look at it, they tend to be, the CEOs, the COOs, the heads of HR. So it's like they're either focused on people or they have to rely on skills that are maybe rational or organized or detail oriented. But when we come to sort of brave, bold, audacious, sometimes mischievous creativity, that is still a place where women are not showing up nearly enough, which I think is really interesting. Why is it that we still tend to celebrate the male creative archetype rather than the female one? And when she does break through, it's often because she's done work for women.
Is that something, because you've had quite the upward arc in terms of, so you worked on the client side of things in advertising, is that right?
Yeah, I started in agency world, and in fact spent a decade at BBH. We talked about Sir John, who I am so glad is now more and more active in sharing his wisdom because I can still benefit from it all these years later. And then went client side for a bit, and then kind of came back to the agency world.
So is that something, like to sort of fighting for women to have a more creative voice in that regard? Is that something that you've found as your arc has kind of moved up, that you've been able to have more influence in?
Yeah, I mean, I have to be honest. I think for the, certainly the good beginning of my career, I was naive about that dynamic, the gender dynamic, because as I said, I grew up in an environment that said, speak your mind, you can do anything. I, got a job. My first job in advertising was working at McCann Erickson on L'Oreal. And so there were many women, it was a brand that was primarily for women, lots of women in power on both the agency and client side. I then went to work for Procter and Gamble at an agency that had Procter and Gamble as their client. Again, largely targeted towards women, so lots of women on both sides. So I kind of didn't realize that this was a thing because I was surrounded by powerful women who, were kind of running the show and were very supportive of me. And then as I moved beyond those categories, I had male and female leaders that were strong. And I mean, when I joined BBH, it was sort of Cindy Gallup in charge. So I just didn't really get it, and I certainly didn't think of myself, in any way as a, you know, example or model. I was just trying to work hard and do my thing. I think as I have now been able to take on more leadership positions and more people share their experience and there's more consciousness around it, and I reflect back, even though for the large majority of my career, I was very supported, often promoted, put in positions of success, enjoy a ton of privilege just, in the first place. I do think about scenarios now in retrospect and think, oh, that's what was happening there. Or, oh, that's a little weird. If that happened to me today, I'd be like, wait a minute, this is not okay. And so I think I've embraced that a little bit more as I've matured and have more life experience.
Well, actually, before we get into your role today, I'd love just to touch upon, so in terms of the creativity side of this, did you have ambitions to get into advertising? Was that always your plan? And did you, I guess I'm interested in someone who's going from the sort of client side things where I imagine you were more dealing with the creative and the idea side of things to now I would guess there's a little less of that given your position. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, as a young person, I wanted to be a broadcast journalist. So I went to school to be a broadcast journalist, and then right away was like, oh, this is boring. And wait a minute, you have to move to like the middle of nowhere to get started. And I'm moving to New York City when I graduate. So for probably all the wrong reasons, I found I discovered advertising because I will say growing up in Pittsburgh was amazing for so many reasons, but at least at that time, I didn't know anyone who was in advert. You knew people who owned their own business, or they were, whatever, teachers, nurses, doctors, like those kind of things. And so I mean, obviously I knew it existed, but I didn't know enough to choose that. But when I was exposed to it at Syracuse University, I thought, wow, this is really interesting. It's all the things that I like. I'm really fascinated by people and sort of psychology, sociology, what moves cultures, always had been. I am drawn to creativity. I myself may not be, an artist, but I am very much drawn to that and drawn to those people, and wanted to kind of be in that space. And then I do like business and sort of a bit of rigor, a bit of rationale, a bit of an argument. And I started my career agency side. So I started in very creative environments, particularly the decade I spent at BBA. Now, I went to clients that were retailers, and so they had internal design departments. Their entire, both at Cole Haan and Old Navy, their product was something that needed to be designed, that needed to be created, and much of the company ran on a design process, and they had internal marketing and creative organizations, and so I was getting a taste of that for sure. I mean, especially retail, they're not playing when it comes to commercial accountability, almost hourly, certainly weekly. But there were still a lot of creative people and creative types around. So it was a really good sort of place for me to get new skills, but not be so far removed from, what makes me happy and passionate. But I will say I missed being at a place where ideas were what everyone rallied around. I really missed also not being at the forefront of what was happening in media and culture, because clients have so many other things to focus on, which was something that I gained a ton of awareness and empathy for. Was like, oh my God, when I was on the agency side, we were so, naive about what they were actually dealing with. That was a tremendous learning experience. But also, my time was just spent learning and focusing on other things, not on, what's moving cultures, what trends have velocity, what's happening with technology, how's the media landscape changing, and I missed that. So that's to say, I was kind of ripe to be recruited back. And Troy, who brought me back to TBWA, is someone who, I had long admired, and we'd talked about working together in the past, and the stars didn't align. And then he called about a role at Chiat LA, which is, a legendary agency in our market, and one that actually shaped my entire view on how to do what we do much earlier in my career. So it felt like, my goodness, I can't say no to that. What an opportunity. And so it was the perfect kind of segue back into agency life, and kind of back into the heart of a creative culture and agency.
Well, let's talk about your role now then. And are we allowed to touch upon where you're headed?
Yes. Yeah. It's just this week, it's kind of the role is evolving.
Yeah, well, let's talk about that. It gives it depends. CEO is sort of. I'm aware of the term. I know the broad strokes, but it's so far beyond my world as a freelance illustrator that it's
Yeah.
kind of you've got to help me out on this one.
Yeah. So currently, I am the CEO of TBWA Chiat Day US. So that's really overseeing LA, Nashville, and New York. And what was announced this week and will begin sort of officially in January is that I'm taking on our global CEO role. So that's held by Troy Ruhanen now, who is an exceptional leader who's been with TBWA for 10 years, Omnicom much longer. He is taking on an elevated role within the organization, actually overseeing all of the advertising agencies and networks that Omnicom, the holding company, owns. This gets like, a little bit nerdy here as you break down all the layers. But anyways, as he elevates, I get to elevate. which is really like quite humbling, but also something I am thrilled to do because I do, TBWA, we call ourselves a disruption company. And disruption is actually something we trademarked decades ago. It is an actual strategic methodology designed to help brands find white space, find platforms that can orchestrate everything they do, that can sort of help them in many ways transcend their category, kind of get to a much bigger space and unlock exponential growth. So it's a gift to any brand and marketer, but it is also an ethos. It's like quite a spirit. We call ourselves pirates. We are always looking on the convention to push, the status quo to challenge. It's like why none of our people do time sheets and training on time, because like when you recruit pirates, they don't like to comply, but it's very beneficial if you have a problem that you need to solve with creativity. And I just love, love that so much, and think it is so relevant for the world that we are living in. The chance to kind of, write the next chapter of that story and think about it even more globally than I do now.
Would it be safe to say then from that role, that you have a huge part to play in creating, let's say, that the psychological safety might be the best way to put it, throughout the agencies and throughout the different outposts, so that the people on the client side, on the creative side, have the freedom to come forward with big ideas and to keep that culture? Because, you and I were part of a panel at Cannes recently with Kyle Chaker and Lucia Aniello about algorithmic trappings and the kind of this place we find ourselves, 20, 25 years into the internet. We're all starting to recognize now while there are many benefits to data, the asphyxiating nature of it also. So is that a big part of your role to maintain that psychological safety?
Hugely. In fact, I think, it is in many ways my primary role, because what I am inheriting is a very strong business it's very dimensional. It's often one of the top agencies in all the markets, great talent, good infrastructure, lots of tools, investment in AI, all the things are there. So that gives me the luxury of really actually focusing a bit on creativity and the creative product and protecting our soul. I think very few companies have a soul. And I think if you got to know us, anyone that does work with us or work for us feels like this place is different. There's a soul here. It was a very strong founder culture, now a refounder culture. So I think one of my jobs is protecting that. And in doing so, that is absolutely about protecting the conditions for creativity and disruption to thrive. And I think that as a CEO, often people think your job is to, deliver the P&L. And believe me, it is, and that is, the responsibility that we, happily commit to on behalf of shareholders, and all those things. And obviously, our clients ultimately have business to deliver, so we are quite rigorous around that. But we fundamentally believe that those results are driven by the work that we put out in the world that moves people and drives those businesses. So you cannot have that in any enduring or durable way if you don't invest in creativity. And I absolutely believe that psychological safety, trust, vulnerability are key to creating cultures where people take risks.
Creativity, by its very nature, you have to embrace the unknown.
It's one of the reasons I don't actually understand the pitch dynamic that exists in our business. So, within advertising, if a client wants to bring on a new agency partner, they typically go through a process that we call pitching, where they kind of solicit proposals. And that usually includes, work, actual creative work, strategic work, creative work. And often it's done in a rather condensed period of time and in isolation of the client, which are pretty artificial circumstances, particularly for TBWA. We really want to collaborate and co-create with our clients. We think they are a part of the creative process. They make it better. And so, this process plays out over and over and over again, and things change hands and people make decisions. And I'm always curious, like, why are we putting more emphasis on the thing that happened in 4 weeks than the body of work that you have, I mean, in our case, 50 years, over 50 years of case studies of what we have done consistently. This isn't a fly by night kind of thing. This is 50 years across lots of different categories, lots of different channels. We'd be better to go on a series of dates than do false work for spec work. We'd be better to like spend the weekend together or something, and get to know each other as humans. But yeah, I think there are all sorts of odd things that we do, whether it's pre-testing, post-testing, the use of data in certain ways, these artificial pitch processes. And of course, it's all because we're trying to mitigate risk. And I think that makes sense. And I appreciate why, the world works that way. But I don't know. We don't seem to learn from the fact that it doesn't actually work. I think we do a lot of things to guarantee certainty that actually do not guarantee certainty and are enemies of true innovation and creativity. But I don't know how to wean us off of it collectively.
I also think that speaks to a globe, the sort of fear in the world. Again, the data is not exclusive to advertising. This is worldwide. We're all bombarded by information now, and of course, a lot of that information is engineered to provoke drama or fear or the fight or flight instinct, and it has a lot to do with what seems to be a global mental health crisis. So I also think that's probably reflected in terms of the way that people seek that certainty elsewhere.
I mean, this neurotesting where they hook people up and measure their brainwave response second by second on an app. I'm like, I don't pay attention to anything that closely. Not my kids, not things I really want to watch. Like, this is like, I don't know. Have we all lost the plot? But I will say, I do think some of it is snake oil. There is such a gullible audience that will do anything to either predict certainty or at least be able to say in the end, well, I tested it, so this isn't my fault. I didn't make the wrong decision because I had exactly. I did all the right things and it said it was going to work. So it's not my fault that it didn't. And again, I mean, we have mortgages to pay and children to feed. And, I don't think that is a weak inclination. I think it's a very human one to kind of protect and self-preservation. But it doesn't serve the work. It doesn't serve creativity. And ultimately, I don't think it serves your business. We talk a lot, the disruption methodology that I mentioned earlier is ridiculously simple. We look at conventions of all sort, whether that's a category or cultural convention, a brand convention. But we really describe that as something that traps you in incremental growth. So it's not that you won't grow by following the convention. I mean, often they're the convention for a reason. It's kind of like slow and steady. And then we think about on the far side of this roadmap, what we call the vision. And this is the thing that is meant to be much bolder, much braver, much more transcendent. And that growth can be exponential. That's the Gatorades. I went from selling a sport drink to becoming a sport brand. We have to believe that the most important thing we are doing is being creative. And that is not exclusive to a department called the creative department. That is everyone in the building. And I do think that you have to believe that it matters and the ideas that you're working on matter. Even if it is in the pursuit of something commercial, that the effort, the human ingenuity, the storytelling, what other themes you can incorporate in, a milk ad that advances society and represents people in authentic and celebratory ways. I think you have to believe that what we're doing is worthy of time, effort, thoughtfulness, a little bit of pain along the way. We talk a lot about a culture that believes that good enough is not good enough. And that, it can always be better and you're always pushing yourself. And that it's worth it. It's worth doing that. And that is something that everybody needs to buy into. I think we also, in our culture, as I said, we try and really promote a collective spirit of challenging the status quo. And we talk about being pirates. I think we also recognize that simplicity is often a path to the most powerful creativity. And there are lots of things that can sometimes become distractions and tangents. And, there's a lot of bells and whistles, but that, there is something just quite simple and essential about ideas that's usually based in truth and insight and, something universal, even if it's very specific. We talk a lot about designing for one, scale to many. I think in our culture, because it's such a collaborative creative art, it's a little bit different maybe than folks that are more singular artists. That whole interpersonal dynamic and how you relate to each other and how you give feedback and how you shape an idea and how you evolve an idea is as important as the idea itself. Because every day we conceive of gorgeously brilliant ideas, and every day they die. They either never make it out of our, doors, or they never make it into the world once clients get a hold of them. There are lots of things that are trying to kill that. And there's just a lot of people that touch it. So we spend actually a lot of time talking about the process and the interpersonal dynamic of collaborative and collective creativity.
It's funny you said about language too. I recently talked to Eleanor Samuelson, who's from the UNICEF's innovation team. Fascinating work worldwide, working with the world's most vulnerable children. And she took the word spelling literally, as in casting spells, the power of our language. So I think you hit on something really important there.
Yeah. And in our business, it's funny because, I think we talked earlier in this conversation that we say, hey, everyone in this organization is a creative and needs to be dedicated to the creative output. But then the truth is, when it really comes down to the creative ideas, we're like, oh, yeah, but you shouldn't have an opinion and you shouldn't have an opinion. Like you're an account person and you're a strategist and you're
Yeah.
so it's like, I think that is, part of the idiosyncrasy of agency life is, who really gets to decide about what is creative and what is worthy and what works and what doesn't work. And
there's something I heard recently, and I think it was in Sapiens. I was reading Sapiens, and I think the number is estimated at 150, and that's the sort of the number of people we can be having our close circle, be that friends, be that family. Above that, you kind of need a myth or a mantra to keep a culture, which brings me back to the disruption thing. Because I mean, how many people work for TBWA?
oh my goodness, I mean, I think there must be 10,000 worldwide, maybe.
Yeah. So I guess, I mean, would it be safe to say that the disruption and that psychology and being clear from the top down on that is essential to manage a company of that size and keep everybody a part of the same voice?
Yeah, it definitely it is definitely the thing that binds us, and it transcends culture, it transcends language, and it's disruption is a pretty easy concept to understand. As I said, it's a methodology. It's a pretty simple methodology by design because anyone can use it. I mean, yes, those who have to really facilitate that need some training, but I could pull you in off the street and we could do a disruption session. It would take me a minute to kind of set the stage. And so now, of course, actually bringing the right stimulus and taking the right things out of it and expressing that creatively is much more difficult. But as a thing that we can all be bonded by and actually use cross border for our clients, disruption is actually perfect for that. And as I said, the beauty of it is it is both an actual methodology, but also an ethos. I mean, I think the best cultures that I've been a part of have that very, very clearly.
And is that also something that informs the way you deal with things like AI, things that are there that have got massive upsides, but also, if ill managed, could also be very detrimental to, could be real game breakers, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, certainly with AI, one of the things that we have been very intentional about is, feeding it with disruption case studies. Again, we've got over 50 years of case studies. I think that allows our use of AI to be more distinctive than just, harnessing the knowledge of the internet, because that really is where it becomes commodified. So I think that's where we think this gives us quite an advantage and an edge. But yeah, I mean, we are. I think the other thing that we're quite aware of is that AI can do great things to accelerate creativity, that can, preserve our time and attention for the things that are really creative, all the things that you hear. But we also believe in humanity. and human originality. And so as we think about the uses and applications of I think we are trying to be very strategic about where we apply those things. And in most cases, it is about empowering and accelerating what very, very smart, strategic, and creative humans can do, fed by the things they've done distinctly in the past. I
Yeah.
also think the thing that I think has been interesting is in some ways, we talked about the sort of certainty piece and the data piece and the measurement piece. And I think there was certainly a period, particularly when consultants and consultancies were really flexing and certainly getting into the creative game, where there was a lot of emphasis on that, much more probably than the creativity. It was a very kind of Martech moment. Important, but there was a lot of focus on that. I actually think, in a strange way, the entree of AI has forced some of us to be like, whoa, 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 okay, yep, but like humans and originality and creativity. And I think we realize that like mediocre creativity, yeah, that probably will be done by machines. And that is, I think, going to force those of us who define ourselves as premium creative companies to be sharper and to be better and to, invest in higher level talent and make sure that clients feel the value of that. And so it might be the thing that we are most afraid of is the thing that actually makes us recommit to the thing that is most special about what we do, that might have kind of taken a back seat to some of the other stuff.
It certainly had that impact on me. So actually hearing you say that from an agency standpoint, it's encouraging. So I think there is a real positive potential here too.
Yeah. But I do think that's what's so wonderful about your work, Ben, is there is such a human hand to it, such a fluidity to it, such a authenticity to it. I mean, obviously you have range in your work, but it's one of the reasons why we did the piece in Cannes live, because that couldn't sort of come to be other than your kind of spontaneous interpretation of something and your particular hand and your particular way of coming together. So, that I think will always, I think, I also think our eyes will get better and better at seeing. Now, of course, the AI will get better and better, but, I think you can kind of tell some now, like when I see your work versus something that was maybe done by AI or previously had been done by like a very rote sort of computer program. I don't know. I think that, look, I think people are going to get displaced. I think there will be a human and economic impact. I think that's unavoidable. But I do think that true artists, storytelling, human originators, and creatives will find like quite quite a preserved space in the total ecosystem that will now just include AI. But I do think the people who have the most originality will be able to kind of outlast the longest.
Do you think that agencies of your size have a role to play in making sure that that remains the case, that the human creativity is at the forefront? Because I think that advertising always has had a major position at the summit of, the creative industries.
Yeah, I mean, I think, advertising is interesting because it's a commercial art. Let's be honest, let's be honest. I think we can't get overinflated about what we do and what the intent of our work is. But it is also an art that people interact with, whether they like it or not, like millions and millions of times a day. Like you'd like to think that people were spending time in museums and in sculpture gardens and, in books and magazines, but like they're not, but they are getting constantly flooded with advertising messages. And so in many ways, we have the most like ambient form of creativity. And so, yes, I do think we have a responsibility to make sure that the level of that creativity is high. And, I think we've got we didn't need AI to make bad or boring work. We were doing that as human beings. So I think that what I'm hoping is that this creates actually more urgency and more intentionality to not do that because it's no longer profitable. And so, look, the economics of our business might change quite radically. We'll see. But I think in terms of being a keeper of kind of original human creativity, I absolutely think that we are, a big part of that. And in many ways, it's the stuff that shows up the most around us, which can be very influential if we are conscious and kind of respect that platform. And we need to do it through advocacy and thought leadership and panels, but also through our work. And I think how we talk to our clients about how we use it and what the implication of that is, there's, and I think that's why we're sort of diving in with both feet, but also like being quite thoughtful about what we apply and how much at scale we apply it, because there's a big responsibility in what you're doing. And it's new. And so you don't want to be a Luddite, like you got to jump in and be, sort of a pace setter. And I think particularly for someone like TBWA, our clients expect us to be pace setting in these places. And so we, have dedicated a ton of time and brain power to how to harness it. But I think we're also trying to be quite responsible as well, as there are like a lot of still unknowns.
Yep. Well, I've kept you probably longer than I should, Erin, but this has been pure magic. So thank you very much for taking the time.
Yeah, thank you. It was good to spend time together. I'm just glad you didn't make me create art on the spot like we did to you.